The first flakes had been soft, lazy things, drifting down from a pale sky as he started along the ridge. By mid-afternoon, they were no longer gentle. The wind rose like a living thing, hurling snow into his face with icy claws. Within minutes, the world vanished. Snow stung his eyes, filling every crease of his jacket, soaking through gloves until his fingers burned. The trail he'd been following dissolved into the blur. His compass felt useless. Every direction looked the same, white above, white below, white all around. The storm swallowed sound as well as sight. No birds. No creaking trees. Only the endless moan of wind through the peaks. His breathing came hard, each gulp of air slicing his lungs with cold. He knew enough about winter mountains to realize the danger. Exposure could kill within hours. He tried retracing his steps, but the wind erased them almost instantly. Panic flickered in his chest. He was alone, too far from camp, and the temperature was plummeting fast. His pack was light. This had been meant as a short hike, not an overnight trek. Now, it might be his grave. The snow deepened with each staggering step, dragging at his legs. His headlamp, though it was only late afternoon, barely cut through the whiteout. He turned it off. The light just reflected back at him like a wall. Somewhere ahead, a darker shape shifted in the blizzard. He blinked hard, thinking it a trick of the eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. The wind rose again, and he kept moving simply because stopping meant freezing solid. Hours, maybe minutes, later, his numb feet struck rock instead of snow. He squinted, realizing he was standing before a jagged cliff face. Somewhere above the roar of the storm, a deep, almost imperceptible rumble came from the darkness in its base. It sounded alive. The dark gap in the cliff face was half hidden by snowdrifts, a ragged mouth just big enough for a man to crouch through. He hesitated, snow whipping at his back, wondering if it was just a hollow in the rock or something deeper, and whether deeper meant safer or more dangerous. The cold made the decision for him. His legs trembled from exhaustion, and his fingertips had gone past pain to a dead, waxy numbness. Whatever lay inside, it was shelter from the storm. He leaned into the gap, brushing past frozen snow crust, and the sound of the wind dulled instantly. The cave was narrow at first, just a crawl space with rough, icy walls that scraped his sleeves. But a few steps in, it widened enough to stand. The floor was uneven, a mix of rock and hard-packed snow. The air was warmer here, though still cold enough to see his breath. He flicked on his headlamp again, its beam catching motes of frost drifting in the stillness. That's when he noticed it, an indentation in the snow broad and deep, as if something heavy had lain there recently. He crouched, touching the edge of it. The print was too big for a human. Much too big. A low resonant exhale came from the shadows ahead. Not the howl of wind. Not the creak of ice. Something alive was in here with him. His instinct screamed to back out into the storm, but before he could move, the shadows shifted. Two amber orbs, wide-set and steady, gleamed in the headlamp's glow. They blinked once, slow and deliberate. The shape around them was massive, fur catching the faint light in muted shades of brown and white. Snow clung to its shoulders like armor. It was a bear, awake, and watching him. And it hadn't moved to leave. For a moment, he couldn't hear the storm outside, only the sound of his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. The bear hadn't charged. It hadn't even risen fully to its feet. It just stood there, head tilted slightly, as if assessing him the same way he was assessing it. Every survival instinct he had screamed leave. A bear meant danger, unpredictability, teeth and claws he could never outrun. But beyond the bear's massive shape, the cave tunneled deeper, away from the wind and snow, and his body was so cold, so weak, that stepping back into the blizzard might be a death sentence. The bear shifted, a soft crunch of snow under its weight, and then, it lay back down. Not all the way to sleep, but not postured to attack either. It turned its head slightly from him, as though saying, "You're not worth the trouble right now." His breath came out in shallow clouds. He inched sideways, pressing himself against the far wall, giving the animal as much space as he could. He set his pack down slowly, never breaking eye contact. The bear's gaze followed him once, then drifted away. The cave's air was thick with the scent of fur and earth, tinged with something warm, animal heat. In the bitter cold, that was as much an invitation as he could hope for. He lowered himself to the floor, pulling his knees up to conserve warmth. The rock at his back was cold, but the faint radiance from the bear's bulk was reaching him already. Outside, the storm roared against the mountainside. In here, there was only the steady rhythmic breath of the great creature a few feet away. He thought of his options, turning them over in his mind like stones. Stay, and share the cave with the bear. Or leave, and almost certainly freeze before morning. It wasn't really a decision at all. He stayed. The wind outside had found a new voice, no longer a constant howl, but a rising, keening wail that seemed to rattle the very bones of the cave. Snow sifted in through the narrow entrance, carried on sudden gusts, and the temperature seemed to drop with each breath. He tucked his hands deep into his armpits, trying to pull warmth back into his fingers. His boots were still damp, and every toe felt like it belonged to someone else. The bear shifted again, a low rumble escaping its chest, not a growl, more like the deep sound of something stretching in its sleep. It turned slightly, curling its massive body so its back faced him, as though building a living barrier between him and the mouth of the cave. That was when he realized. The bear was blocking the worst of the wind for him. Whether intentional or not, he didn't know. But the wall of muscle and fur made the air around him a fraction less cold, and in a storm like this, that could be the difference between life and death. He tried not to think about hunger, but his stomach gave him away with a low, desperate growl. He reached into his pack, finding the last of his trail mix and chewing slowly, rationing every bite. He could feel the bear's attention, even though it didn't turn around. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't seem to work normally here. The storm outside was a living thing, clawing and thrashing against the mountain, but the cave felt like its own small world, dim, heavy with the smell of wet fur, and thrumming with the sound of another creature's heartbeat. He leaned his head back against the wall. His eyelids grew heavy. For the first time since the whiteout began, the thought crept in that he might make it through the night. And if he did, it would be because of the storm's most unlikely companion. When he opened his eyes, the world was silent. The storm's roar had been replaced by a strange, heavy stillness, as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Pale light seeped into the cave entrance, turning the air a dim silver. He sat up slowly, every muscle stiff and aching from cold and cramped sleep. The bear was gone. For a moment, his breath caught. The great shape that had been his only company through the long night was nowhere in sight, the packed snow where it had lain now an empty furrowed hollow. Panic flickered. Was it still outside? Had it left for good? He crawled toward the entrance, careful not to disturb the fragile warmth his body had clung to. The snow outside was waist-deep, glittering under a thin veil of morning mist. His own tracks from the day before had all but vanished, erased by the blizzard. But there, just a few feet from the cave, were fresh impressions in the snow, enormous paw prints, leading away down the slope. And something else. Between each set of paw prints were shallower, uneven marks, almost like the snow had been disturbed by something being dragged. His eyes followed the trail until it disappeared into the white glow of the trees below. He glanced back at the cave, at the safe cocoon it had been, and then forward toward the mysterious path. The thought of staying seemed unbearable now. He couldn't shake the feeling that the bear had gone somewhere with purpose, and that maybe, just maybe, it wanted him to follow. Pulling his scarf tighter, he stepped out into the new snow. The cold bit deep, but the air was cleaner, lighter, and the silence carried an unspoken invitation. The second morning had brought a choice: stay in the cave and survive, or follow the tracks and find out why a wild bear hadn't let him freeze to death. He took his first step after it. The trail wound down the slope, weaving between frost-laden pines that groaned under the weight of the storm's snowfall. He followed the bear's paw prints carefully, each one a shallow crater in the untouched white. The uneven drag marks between them continued, and with every step, curiosity warred with a gnawing cold in his bones. Then, the trees parted. In a small clearing, sunlight broke through the mist in golden shafts, casting the snow in a shimmering glow. And there, standing at the far edge, was the bear. Steam rose from its broad shoulders with every breath, its fur dusted with glittering ice. It didn't move toward him or away, it simply watched. At its paws lay a dark, weathered bundle half buried in snow. Cautiously, he stepped closer. The bear didn't growl, didn't retreat. Its eyes, deep and unreadable, stayed locked on his. He knelt and brushed the snow from the bundle. His breath caught in his throat. It was a backpack. His backpack. The same one he'd lost 3 days ago in the blizzard. The one that had tumbled from his shoulder and been swallowed by the wind. Inside was everything he needed: food, a thermal blanket, his flare kit. He didn't understand how, or why, but the drag marks in the snow made sense now. The bear had carried it here. He looked up, ready to speak, though he didn't know what he'd say. But the bear was already turning away, padding slowly toward the shadowed tree-line. For a heartbeat, it glanced back, the faintest flicker of recognition, or maybe farewell, in its gaze. Then it was gone, swallowed by the forest. Standing in that golden-lit clearing, he felt the enormity of what had just happened. The storm had taken so much from him, time, strength, certainty, but the forest, through its most unlikely guardian, had given him back his life. He tightened the straps of his pack, lit the flare, and watched the smoke spiral upward into the clear, cold sky. Help would come. But some part of him knew the real rescue had already happened.